This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This is a recording by Steve Anderson of A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain. Chapter 4. Sir Dinadan, the Humorist. It seemed to me that this quaint lie was most simply and beautifully told. But then I had heard it only once, and that makes a difference. It was pleasant to the others when it was fresh, no doubt. Sir Dinadan, the Humorist, was the first to awake, and he soon roused the rest with a practical joke of sufficiently poor quality. He tied some metal mugs to a dog's tail and turned him loose, and he tore around and around the place in a frenzy of fright, with all the other dogs bellowing after him and battering and crashing against everything that came in their way, and making altogether a chaos of confusion and a most deafening din and turmoil, at which every man and woman of the multitude laughed till the tears flowed, and some fell out of their chairs and wallowed on the floor in ecstasy. It was just like so many children. Sir Dinadan was so proud of his exploit that he could not keep from telling over and over again to weariness how the immortal idea happened to occur to him. And as is the way with humorists of his breed, he was still laughing at it after everybody else had got through. He was so set up that he concluded to make a speech, of course a humorous speech. I think I never heard so many old played-out jokes strung together in my life. He was worse than the minstrels, worse than the clown in the circus. It seemed particularly sad to sit here 1,300 years before I was born and listen again to poor, flat, worm-eaten jokes that had given me the dry gripes when I was a boy 1,300 years afterwards. It about convinced me that there isn't any such thing as a new joke possible. Everybody laughed at these antiquities, but then they always do. I had noticed that centuries later. However, of course, the scoffer didn't laugh. I mean the boy. No, he scoffed. There wasn't anything he wouldn't scoff at. He said the most of Sir Dinadan's jokes were rotten, and that the rest were petrified. I said petrified was good, as I believed, myself, that the only right way to classify the majestic ages of some of these jokes was by geologic periods. But that neat idea hit the boy in a blank space, for geology hadn't been invented yet. However, I made a note of the remark, and calculated to educate the commonwealth up to it if I pulled through. It is no use to throw away a good thing merely because the market isn't ripe yet. Now Sir Kay arose and began to fire up on his history mill with me for fuel. It was time for me to feel serious, and I did. Sir Kay told how he had encountered me in a far land of barbarians, who all wore the same ridiculous garb that I did, a garb that was a work of enchantment, and intended to make the wearer secure from hurt by human hands. However, he had nullified the force of the enchantment by prayer, and had killed my 13 knights in a 3 hours' battle, and taken me prisoner, sparing my life in order that so strange a curiosity as I was might be exhibited to the wonder and admiration of the king and court. He spoke of me all the time in the blandest way, as this prodigious giant, and this horrible sky-towering monster, and this tusked and taloned man-devouring ogre, and everybody took in all this bosh in the naivest way, and never smiled or seemed to notice that there was any discrepancy between these watered statistics and me. He said that in trying to escape from him I sprang into the top of a tree 200 cubits high on a single bound, but he dislodged me with a stone the size of a cow, which all to brast the most of my bones, and then swore me to appear at Arthur's court for sentence. He ended by condemning me to die at noon on the 21st, and was so little concerned about it that he stopped to yawn before he named the date. I was in a dismal state by this time. Indeed, I was hardly enough in my right mind to keep the run of a dispute that sprung up as to how I had better be killed, the possibility of the killing being doubted by some because of the enchantment in my clothes. And yet it was nothing but an ordinary suit of $15 slop shops. Still, I was sane enough to notice this detail, to wit, many of the terms used in the most matter-of-fact way by this great assemblage of the first ladies and gentlemen in the land would have made a Comanche blush. Indelicacies, too mild a term to convey the idea. However, I had read Tom Jones and Roderick Random, and other books of that kind, and knew that the highest and first ladies and gentlemen in England had remained little or no cleaner in their talk, and in the morals and conduct which such talk implies, clear up to 100 years ago. In fact, clear into our own 19th century, in which century, broadly speaking, the earliest samples of the real lady and real gentleman discoverable in English history, or in European history for that matter, may be said to have made their appearance. Suppose Sir Walter, instead of putting the conversations into the mouths of his characters, had allowed the characters to speak for themselves. We should have had talk from Rebecca and Ivanhoe and the soft Lady Rowena which would have embarrassed a tramp in our day. However, to the unconsciously indelicate, all things are delicate. King Arthur's people were not aware that they were indecent, and I had presence of mind enough not to mention it. They were so troubled about my enchanted clothes that they were mightily relieved at last when old Merlin swept the difficulty away for them with a common-sense hint. He asked them why they were so dull, why it didn't occur to them to strip me. In half a minute I was naked as a pair of tongs, and dear, dear, to think of it, I was the only embarrassed person there. Everybody discussed me, and did it as unconcernedly as if I had been a cabbage. Queen Guenever was as naively interested as the rest, and said she had never seen anybody with legs just like mine before. It was the only compliment I got, if it was a compliment. Finally, I was carried off in one direction, and my perilous clothes in another. I was shoved into a dark and narrow cell in a dungeon, with some scant remnants for dinner, some moldy straw for a bed, and no end of rats for company. End of chapter 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This is a recording by Steve Anderson of A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain. Chapter 5. An Inspiration. I was so tired that even my fears were not able to keep me awake long. When I next came to myself, I seemed to have been asleep a very long time. My first thought was, well, what an astonishing dream I've had. I reckon I've waked just in time to keep from being hanged or drowned or burned or something. I'll nap again till the whistle blows, and then I'll go down to the arms factory and have it out with Hercules. But just then I heard the harsh music of rusty chains and bolts. A light flashed in my eyes, and that butterfly Clarence stood before me. I gasped with surprise. My breath almost got away from me. "What?" I said. "You here yet? Go along with the rest of the dream. Scatter." But he only laughed, in his light-hearted way, and fell to making fun of my sorry plight. "All right," I said resignedly, "let the dream go on. I'm in no hurry." "Prithee, what dream?" "What dream? Why, the dream that I am in Arthur's court, a person who never existed, and that I am talking to you, who are nothing but a work of the imagination." "Oh, la, indeed! And it is a dream that you're to be burned tomorrow? Ho, ho! Answer me that." The shock that went through me was distressing. I now began to reason that my situation was in the last degree serious, dream or no dream, for I knew by past experience of the lifelike intensity of dreams, that to be burned to death, even in a dream, would be very far from being a jest, and was a thing to be avoided by any means, fair or foul, that I could contrive. So I said, beseechingly: "Ah, Clarence, good boy, only friend I've got, for you are my friend, aren't you? Don't fail me. Help me devise some way of escaping from this place." "Now do but hear thyself. Escape? Why, man, the corridors are in guard and keep of men at arms." "No doubt, no doubt. But how many, Clarence? How many, I hope?" "Full a score. One may not hope to escape." After a pause, hesitatingly: "And there be other reasons, and weightier." "Other ones? What are they?" "Well, they say oh, but I daren't, indeed daren't." "Why, poor lad, what is the matter? Why do you blench? Why do you tremble so?" "Oh, in sooth, there is need. I do want to tell you, but—" "Come, come, be brave, be a man, speak out, there's a good lad." He hesitated, pulled one way by desire, the other way by fear. Then he stole to the door and peeped out, listening, and finally crept close to me and put his mouth to my ear and told me his fearful news in a whisper, and with all the cowering of apprehension of one who is venturing into awful ground and speaking of things whose very mention might be frightened with death. "Merlin, in his malice, has woven a spell about this dungeon, and there bides not the man in these kingdoms that would be desperate enough to essay to cross its lines with you. Now God pity me, I have told it. Ah, be kind to me, be merciful to a poor boy who means thee well, for an thou betray me, I am lost." I laughed, the only refreshing laugh I had had for some time, and shouted: "Merlin has wrought a spell? Merlin? Forsooth! That cheap old humbug, that moldering old ass! Bosh, pure bosh, the silliest bosh in the world. Why, it does seem to me that of all the childish, idiotic, chuckle-headed, chicken-livered superstitions that oh, damn Merlin!" But Clarence had slumped to his knees before I had half finished, and he was like to go out of his mind with fright. "Oh, beware! Those are awful words. Any moment these walls may crumble upon us if you say such things. Oh, call them back before it is too late!" Now this strange exhibition gave me a good idea, and set me to thinking, if everybody about here was so honestly and sincerely afraid of Merlin's pretended magic as Clarence was, certainly a superior man like me ought to be shrewd enough to contrive some way to take advantage of such a state of things. I went on thinking, and worked out a plan. Then I said: "Get up, pull yourself together, look me in the eye. Do you know why I laughed?" "No, but for our blessed Lady's sake, do it no more." "Well, I tell you why I laughed. Because I am a magician myself." "Thou?" The boy recoiled a step, and caught his breath, for the thing hit him rather sudden, but the aspect which he took on was very, very respectful. I took quick note of that. It indicated that a humbug didn't need to have a reputation in this asylum. People stood ready to take him at his word without that. I resumed: "I've known Merlin 700 years, and he—" "700? Don't interrupt me." "He has died and come alive again 13 times, and traveled under a new name every time: Smith, Jones, Robinson, Jackson, Peters, Haskins, Merlin, a new alias every time he turns up. I knew him in Egypt 300 years ago. I knew him in India 500 years ago. He is always blethering around in my way. Everywhere I go he makes me tired. He don't amount to shucks as a magician. He knows some of the old common tricks, but he's never got beyond the rudiments, and never will. He's well enough for provinces, one-night stands and that sort of thing, you know, but dear me, he oughtn't to be set up for an expert. Anyway, not where there's a real artist. Now look here, Clarence, I'm going to stand your friend, right along, and in return you must be mine. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to get word to the king that I am a magician myself, and the supreme grand high you muckamuckin head of the tribe, at that. I want him to be made to understand that I am just quietly arranging a little calamity here that will make the fur fly in these realms if Sir Kay's project is carried out and any harm comes to me. Will you get that to the king for me?" The poor boy was in such a state that he could hardly answer me. It was pitiful to see a creature so terrified, so unnerved, so demoralized. But he promised everything, and on my side he made me promise over and over again that I would remain his friend and never turn against him or cast any enchantments upon him. And he worked his way out, staying himself with his hand along the wall like a sick person. Presently this thought occurred to me: how heedless I have been! When the boy gets calm, he will wonder why a great magician like me should have begged a boy like him to help me get out of this place. He'll put this and that together, and will see that I am a humbug. I worried over that heedless blunder for an hour, and called myself a great many hard names, meantime. But finally it occurred to me all of a sudden that these animals didn't reason, that they never put this and that together, that all their talk showed they didn't know a discrepancy when they saw it. I was at rest then. But as soon as one is at rest in this world, off he goes on something else to worry about. It occurred to me that I had made another blunder. I had sent the boy off to alarm his betters with a threat, I intending to invent a calamity at my leisure. Now the people who are the readiest and eagerest and willingest to swallow miracles are the very ones who are hungriest to see you perform them. Suppose I should be called on for a sample? Suppose I should be asked to name my calamity? Yes, I had made a blunder. I ought to have invented my calamity first. What shall I do? What can I say to gain a little time? I was in trouble again, in the deepest kind of trouble. There's a footstep. They're coming. If I had only just a moment to think. Good. I've got it. I'm all right. You see, it was the eclipse. It came to my mind in the nick of time, how Columbus or Cortez or one of those people played an eclipse as a saving trump once on some savages, and I saw my chance. I could play it myself now, and it wouldn't be any plagiarism either, because I should get it in nearly 1,000 years ahead of those parties. Clarence came in, subdued, distressed, and said: "I hasten the message to our liege the king," and straightway he had me to his presence. He was frightened even to the marrow, and was minded to give order for your instant enlargement, and that you be clothed in fine raiment, and lodged as befitted one so great. But then came Merlin and spoiled it all, for he persuaded the king that you are mad, and know not whereof you speak, and said your threat is but foolishness and idle vaporing. They disputed long, but in the end Merlin scoffing said, "Wherefore hath he not named his brave calamity? Verily it is because he cannot." This thrust did in a most sudden sort close the king's mouth, and he could offer naught to turn the argument, and so, reluctant, and full loath to do you the discourtesy, he yet prayeth you to consider his perplexed case, as noting how the matter stands, and name the calamity, if so be you have determined the nature of it and the time of its coming. "Oh, prithee delay not. To delay at such a time were to double and treble the perils that already compass thee about. Oh, be thou wise, name the calamity." I allowed silence to accumulate while I got my impressiveness together, and then said: How long have I been shut up in this hole?" "You were shut up when yesterday was well spent. It is 9 of the morrow now." "No! Then I have slept well, sure enough. 9 in the morning now, and yet it is the very complexion of midnight, to a shade. This is the 20th, then?" "The 20th, yes." "And I am to be burned alive to morrow?" The boy shuddered. "At what hour?" "At high noon." "Now, then, I will tell you what to say." I paused, and stood over that cowering lad a whole minute in awful silence. Then in a voice deep, measured, charged with doom, I began, and rose by dramatically graded stages to my colossal climax, which I delivered as sublime and noble a way as ever I did such a thing in my life. "Go back and tell the king that at that hour I will smother the whole world in the dead blackness of midnight. I will blot out the sun, and he shall never shine again. The fruits of the earth shall rot for lack of light and warmth, and the peoples of the earth shall famish and die to the last man." I had to carry the boy out myself, he sunk into such a collapse. I handed him over to the soldiers, and went back. End of chapter 5. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This is a recording by Steve Anderson of A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain. Chapter 6. The Eclipse. In the stillness and the darkness, realization soon began to supplement knowledge. The mere knowledge of a fact is pale, but when you come to realize your fact, it takes on color. It is all the difference between hearing of a man being stabbed to the heart and seeing it done. In the stillness and the darkness, the knowledge that I was in deadly danger took to itself deeper and deeper meaning all the time. A something which was realization crept inch by inch through my veins and turned me cold. But it is a blessed provision of nature that at times like these, as soon as a man's mercury has got down to a certain point, there comes a revulsion, and he rallies. Hope springs up, and cheerfulness along with it, and then he is in good shape to do something for himself, if anything can be done. When my rally came, it came with a bound. I said to myself that my eclipse would be sure to save me, and make me the greatest man in the kingdom besides. And straightway my mercury went to the top of the tube, and my solicitudes all vanished. I was as happy a man as there was in the world. I was even impatient for tomorrow to come, I so wanted to gather in that great triumph, and be the center of all the nation's wonder and reverence. Besides, in a business way, it would be the making of me. I knew that. Meantime, there was one thing which had got pushed into the background of my mind. That was the half conviction that when the nature of my proposed calamity should be reported to those superstitious people, it would have such an effect that they would want to compromise. So, by and by, when I heard the footsteps coming, that thought was recalled to me, and I said to myself, as sure as anything, it's the compromise. Well, if it's good, all right, I will accept. But if it isn't, I mean to stand my ground and play my hand for all it is worth. The door opened, and some men at arms appeared. The leader said, "The stake is ready. Come." The stake! The strength went out of me, and I almost fell down. It is hard to get one's breath at such a time, such lumps come into one's throat, and such gaspings, but as soon as I could speak, I said, "But this is a mistake. The execution is tomorrow." "Order changed. Been set forward a day. Haste thee." I was lost. There was no help for me. I was dazed, stupefied. I had no command over myself. I only wandered purposely about, like one out of his mind. So soldiers took hold of me and pulled me along with them, out of the cell and along the maze of underground corridors, and finally into the fierce glare of daylight and the upper world. As we stepped into the vast enclosed court of the castle, I got a shock. For the first thing I saw was the stake, standing in the center, and near it the piled fagots and a monk. On all four sides of the court the seated multitudes rose rank above rank, forming sloping terraces that were rich with color. The king and the queen sat in their thrones, the most conspicuous figures there, of course. To note all this occupied but a second. The next second Clarence had slipped from some place of concealment and was pouring news into my ear, his eyes beaming with triumph and gladness. He said: "'Tis through me the change was wrought, and main hard have I worked to do it, too. But when I revealed to them the calamity in store, and saw how mighty was the terror it did engender, then saw I also that this was the time to strike. Wherefore I diligently pretended unto this and that and the other one, that your power against the sun could not reach its full until the morrow. And so if any would save the sun and the world, you must be slain today, where your enchantments are but in the weaving and lack potency. Odds bodikins, it was but a dull lie, a most indifferent invention, but you should have seen them seize it and swallow it, in the frenzy of their fright, as it were salvation sent from heaven. And all the while I was laughing in my sleeve the one moment to see them so cheaply deceived, and glorifying God the next, that he was content to let the meanest of his creatures be his instrument to the saving of thy life. Ah, how happy has the matter sped! You will not need to do the sun a real hurt. Ah, forget not that. On your soul forget it not. Only make a little darkness, only the littlest little darkness. Mind and cease with that. It will be sufficient. They will see that I spoke falsely, being ignorant, as they will fancy. And with the falling of the first shadow of that darkness, you shall see them go mad with fear, and they will set you free and make you great. Go to thy triumph now. But remember, good friend, I implore thee, remember my supplication, and do the blessed sun no hurt, for my sake, thy true friend." I choked out some words through my grief and misery, as much to say I would spare the sun, for which the lad's eye paid me back with such deep and loving gratitude that I had not the heart to tell him his good-hearted foolishness had ruined me and sent me to my death. As the soldiers assisted me across the court, the stillness was so profound that if I had been blindfolded I should have supposed I was in a solitude instead of walled in by 4,000 people. There was not a movement perceptible in those masses of humanity. They were as rigid as stone images, and as pale, and dread sat upon every countenance. This hush continued while I was being chained to the stake. It still continued while the fagots were carefully and tediously piled about my ankles, my knees, my thighs, my body. Then there was a pause, and a deeper hush, if possible, and a man knelt down at my feet with a blazing torch. The multitude strained forward, gazing, and parting slightly from their seats without knowing it, the monk raised his hands above my head and his eyes toward the blue sky, and began some words in Latin. In this attitude he droned on and on, a little while, and then stopped. I waited 2 or 3 moments, then looked up. He was standing there, petrified. With a common impulse the multitude rose slowly up and stared into the sky. I followed their eyes, as sure as guns. There was my eclipse beginning. The life went boiling through my veins. I was a new man. The rim of black spread slowly into the sun's disk. My heart beat higher and higher, and still the assemblage and the priest stared into the sky, motionless. I knew that this gaze would be turned upon me next. When it was, I was ready. I was in one of the most grand attitudes I ever struck, with my arms stretched up, pointing to the sun. It was a noble effect. You could see the shudder sweep the mass like a wave. Two shouts rang out, one close upon the heels of the other. "Apply the torch!" "I forbid it!" The one was from Merlin, the other from the king. Merlin started from his place, to apply the torch himself, I judged. I said, "Stay where you are. If any man moves, even the king, before I give him leave, I will blast him with thunder. I will consume him with lightnings." The multitude sank meekly into their seats, and I was just expecting they would. Merlin hesitated a moment or two, and I was on pins and needles during that little while. Then he sat down, and I took a good breath, for I knew I was master of the situation now. The king said, "Be merciful, fair sir, and essay no further in this perilous matter, lest disaster follow. It was reported to us your powers could not attain unto their full strength until the morrow, but your majesty thinks the report may have been a lie?" It was a lie. That made an immense effect. Up went appealing hands everywhere, and the king was assailed with a storm of supplications that I might be bought off at any price, and the calamity stayed. The king was eager to comply. He said, "Name any terms, reverend sir, even to the halving of my kingdom, but banish this calamity, spare the sun." My fortune was made. I would have taken him up in a minute, but I couldn't stop an eclipse. The thing was out of the question, so I asked time to consider. The king said, "How long, good sir? Be merciful. Look, it groweth darker moment by moment. Prithee, how long?" "Not long. Half an hour, maybe an hour." There were 1,000 pathetic protests, but I couldn't shorten up any, for I couldn't remember how long a total eclipse lasts. I was in a puzzled condition anyway, and wanted to think. Something was wrong about that eclipse, and the fact was very unsettling. If this wasn't the one I was after, how was I to tell whether this was the 6th century or nothing but a dream? Dear me, if I could only prove it was the latter, here was a glad new hope. If the boy was right about the date, and this was surely the 20th, it wasn't the 6th century. I reached for the monk's sleeve, in considerable excitement, and asked him what day of the month it was. Hang him. He said it was the 21st. It made me turn cold to hear him. I begged him not to make any mistake about it, but he was sure. He knew it was the 21st. So that feather-headed boy had botched things again. The time of the day was right for the eclipse. I had seen that for myself, in the beginning, by the dial that was near by. Yes, I was in King Arthur's court, and I might as well make the most out of it I could. The darkness was steadily growing, the people becoming more and more distressed. Now I said, "I have reflected, Sir King. For a lesson I will let this darkness proceed and spread night in the world, but whether I blot out the sun for good or restore it shall rest with you. These are the terms, to wit: you shall remain king over all your dominions, and receive all the glories and honors that belong to the kingship. But you shall appoint me your perpetual minister and executive, and give me for my services 1% of such actual increase of revenue over and above its present amount as I may succeed in creating for the state. If I can't live on that, I shan't ask anybody to give me a lift. Is it satisfactory?" There was a prodigious roar of applause, and out of the midst of it the king's voice rose, saying, Away with his bonds, and set him free, and do him homage high and low, rich and poor, for he is become the king's right hand, is clothed with power and authority, and his seat is upon the highest step of the throne. Now sweep away this creeping night, and bring light and cheer again, that all the world may bless thee. But I said, that a common man should be shamed before the world is nothing. But it were dishonor to the king if any that saw his minister naked should not also see him delivered from his shame. If I might ask that my clothes be brought again— They are not meet, the king broke in. Fetch raiment of another sort. Clothe him like a prince. My idea worked. I wanted to keep things as they were till the eclipse was total, otherwise they would be trying again to get me to dismiss the darkness, and of course I couldn't do it. Sending for the clothes gained some delay, but not enough. So I had to make another excuse. I said it would be but natural if the king should change his mind and repent to some extent of what he had done under excitement. Therefore I would let the darkness grow a little, and if at the end of a reasonable time the king had kept his mind the same, the darkness should be dismissed. Neither the king nor anybody else was satisfied with that arrangement, but I had to stick to my point. It grew darker and darker, and blacker while I struggled with those awkward sixth-century clothes. It got to be pitch dark at last, and the multitude groaned with horror to feel the cold, uncanny night breezes fan through the place, and see the stars come out and twinkle in the sky. At last the eclipse was total, and I was very glad of it, but everybody else was in misery, which was quite natural. I said, the king, by his silence, still stands to the terms. Then I lifted up my hands, stood just so a moment, and I said, with the most awful solemnity, let the enchantment dissolve and pass harmless away. There was no response for a moment in that deep darkness and that graveyard hush. But when the silver rim of the sun pushed itself out a moment or two later, the assemblage broke loose with a vast shout, and came pouring down like a deluge to smother me with blessings and gratitude. And Clarence was not the last of the wash, to be sure. End of chapter 6.